Hey guys, in this video we're going to be writing some Python code and running it on the client side in the browser, and we're able to do this with a technology called Brython, which is something that someone suggested to me a while ago to do a tutorial on, and I was looking at it, playing with it over the weekend, and it's actually really cool, so I figured I'd do a video on it today and show you how to do some things. So this is basically going to be a crash course where I show you how to do things like manipulate the DOM, use local storage, make Ajax calls, doing all this stuff using Python. So we're not going to write even a line of JavaScript. And even if you don't know Python, even if you've never written a line of Python, I think that you'll be able to follow along just fine because everything is very self-explanatory, and I'm going to explain things as I go along. So this is the Brython website. It's not very pretty, but it has a lot of good information. If you go to demo, it shows you how to do all types of stuff. We'll basically be using this browser package that we'll bring in to deal with the DOM and to deal with things that we would do in JavaScript. And then what else? Documentation. You have all these methods here: Ajax, local storage, templates, WebSockets. You can do just a ton of stuff with this technology. So this is what we'll build. It's basically a sandbox where I'm going to show you how to do a bunch of stuff. So first thing, I'll show you how to create events. We can bind elements to events. We can select from the DOM. We can create alerts. We can insert into the DOM. We can bind to text elements. We can use variables. This is actually in a variable using a template. We can make Ajax requests or HTTP requests. If I click this button here, it'll reach out to an API and get a Chuck Norris joke and put it in the DOM. We can load files. So if I grab a text file here, it'll get loaded here. I'll show you how to manipulate CSS. We can rotate and do other stuff. Saved items, so I'll show you how we can add to local storage. So if I add a value here and click add, it shows here, and if I reload, it stays because it's actually in local storage. And if I click remove, that will remove it from local storage. So all this stuff we're going to do, again, without writing one line of JavaScript. It's all Python code that we're going to execute on the client side. Okay, so this is the code right here. It's just one single HTML file, and I'll have this in the description if you guys are interested, but I would suggest following along. So what we're going to do is just minimize this, and what I have here is just, again, a single HTML file. Now there's two things you have to include, two JavaScript files. One is Brython.js, and one is the Brython standard lib.js file. And you can download these from the site. Let me just go back to this. So you can either go to download and you can grab the latest release here, or you can go to cdnjs.com, which is what I did. And if you just type in Brython, you want to grab this and you want to grab this, the standard lib. Okay, so you just need to include those two files and then you're good to go. So I do have some just basic CSS, just so it doesn't look, too horrible. Not much. Just have a card class, styling the inputs and buttons and stuff. And then in the body here, I just simply have an H1. So I haven't done anything yet that has to do with Brython. So we're going to get started by adding to the body here an onload event. And when the body loads, we then want to call Brython. Okay, so that's basically going to initialize it so that we can use it. And the first thing I want to do is just show you how to do things like create events and grab elements from the DOM and stuff like that. So let's create in our HTML an H2, and I'm going to give this an ID of hello. So we're going to work a lot with IDs because that's how we can select from the DOM using Python. And underneath the H2, I'm going to create a button, and let's give this button an ID of alert-btn, and then just say alert and insert. Okay, and I have this running with live server within VS Code. Now, in order to write Python, we need to actually create a script tag. So we're going to go down to the right above the ending body, and let's add a script tag here. And this is going to take in a type attribute, and we want to make sure we set this to text/Python. And we also want to give it an ID because we're going to have a different script for everything that we do here. So I'm going to create an ID of script 0. Now from here, we want to bring in the browser package. So we're going to say from browser we want to import, and there's a bunch of stuff that we can import from this package, and we're going to want document, console, and alert. And you can probably guess what these things do. So document is used to select things from the DOM and create events and stuff like that. Console is to do things like console logs, and then of course alert will do a browser alert. So I'm going to create a function here. So using Python, we create a function with the def keyword, or define, and we'll call this show. Now this is going to be connected to an event, and we can actually pass in an event parameter just like we would with JavaScript. And then I'm just going to do a console log, and just console log a string of hello. Okay, so we have a function that's just going to do a console log. Now to create an event, we can grab something from the DOM with document, and I'm going to grab the alert button, which has an ID of alert btn. So this right here, this button has an ID, and I'm grabbing it from the DOM with this syntax, which is, you know, similar to doing in JavaScript document.getElement by ID. Although this, I think this looks cleaner. So to add an event, we can bind. So let's say bind, and we want to bind to a click event the function of show. Okay, so this should be very self-explanatory regardless of how much Python you know. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the console here. And it's going to tell us right here using IndexedDB for the standard lib modules cache. So basically it's just using IndexedDB as it's a internal storage mechanism in your browser, and Brython takes advantage of that. In fact, if you go to application and you go down to IndexedDB, you should see your Brython cache modules. So it's just letting you know in the console that it's using that. Now, if I go ahead and I click this button, we're going to see hello. And we didn't write any JavaScript at all, and we were able to create an event on this button and also log to the console. Now, if we want to alert, we can use that alert that we brought in, and we can alert, we'll say hello world, click it, we get an alert. It's still going to log as well. If we want to insert something into the DOM, we could do, there's a few different ways I'll show you, but we could take document, and that H2 that we created has an ID of hello, and we could set to that, let's set it to hello world. So now when we click this, it's going to do all three. It's going to call the alert, which is synchronous, so it's actually, we have to clear this before this hello world gets put in. But once we click OK, oh, I forgot the angle bracket. So we actually have to do this syntax, this angle bracket, and then the equals. So we'll click that, close the alert, and then that gets put right into the DOM. All right, you can also use like .text and .text content, and I'll show you that syntax in a little bit. So pretty simple to deal with the document object model with Brython. So the next thing that I want to show you is actually one more thing I want to do is show you that if we log E, so this event parameter, so I'm just going to click this again, and down here you'll see that it logs all of our event stuff. So we can get the target, we can get everything that you can get with JavaScript. So the position of the element, the source, just everything. Now I'm going to create, let's go right here and let's add let's create a text input. So we'll say input, and let's give this an ID of text. Okay, so type text, ID text. We'll put a placeholder, and we'll just say enter something. Okay, and then underneath it, I'm going to have a span and give this an ID of output. And what I want to do is bind whatever I type in the input. So if I save this, whatever I type in, I want to output into this span. So we're actually going to create another script for this. So I'm going to just copy this. Let's actually put some comments in here as well. So this is alert and DOM insert. And then this will say text bind. And we want to still do from browser, we want to import. However, we don't need alert. Let's get rid of that. And then let's go down here, and instead of the alert button, we want to bind to that text input, which we gave an ID of text. And instead of a click, I want to bind to the input. So when we type in, that'll fire off input. And then let's call a function called show text. And then we'll go up here, we'll call this function show text. And let's console log e.target.value. And I'm just gonna get rid of the rest of this. Okay. And one thing, it's gonna give us an error because it says we have the same ID script 0. So we can't have two of the same ID. So this is gonna be script 1. Now if I type in here, you're gonna see down here it logs whatever I type in. Okay, just like you would with JavaScript. So, I mean, you're going to see a lot of similarities, except this isn't JavaScript. Now, instead of console logging it, I want to output it in the span. So, if you want, take a second and think about how we can do that. You already know how to select something from the DOM. And I told you can use, .text content. So, I mean, it's pretty simple to figure out. We can just say document has an ID of output. We're going to set the text content equal to e.target.value. Okay, and then we can just get rid of this console log, and then we no longer need this console anymore. So if I start to type, there we go, it's going to output it into that span. Okay, so really dynamic functionality using Python. The next thing I want to show you is how to use templates with variables. So we can actually have variables in our HTML. This is pretty cool. So if we have an H2 with an ID of greet, and I put in hello, I can use these brackets here and put in a variable. Now right now it's just going to show that, obviously, but if we go down here and create a new script, I'm just going to grab that, and let's make sure we change that to script 2, and we'll say template and variable. So we want to bring in document. So we'll say from browser. We want to import document, but we also want to bring in template from browser.template. So from browser.template, we want to import template, uppercase T. And then from here we can create a template. So we can say template, and then we're going to grab onto the greet, which is the H2. Okay, so it has an ID of greet, and then we can simply call render, and we can render with a variable called name, or whatever we want to call it, and then set it to something. So now if I save, we get hello Brad. So it replaces that name with the brackets with whatever value we put in here. Okay, and we can have multiple variables for templates as well. And again, if you want to go deeper into this stuff, you can go into the documentation. The documentation is pretty good for this. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how to make an Ajax call or an HTTP request. So back up in the HTML, let's create a button, and I'm going to give this an ID of joke-btn, and let's say get joke, and let's have a div with an ID of joke, and give it a class of card to just give it a border and some padding. And in here I'm going to say click the get joke button. Alright, and then we're going to go down here and create a new script. Just copy that. Okay, let's change this to script 3, and we'll say Ajax call. Oops. So as far as making an Ajax call goes, we need to first bring in, let's say, from browser. We want to import document, and we want to import Ajax. And let's also import console, so we can use that as well. Now the URL, I'm going to set a variable here. This is just a variable within Python. I'm going to set this to the API that we're using, which is a Chuck Norris joke API. So it's api.chucknorris.io/joke/random. So that's the URL we want. And then we're going to have an event on the button. So we can say document has an ID of joke btn. We want to bind an event, a click event. And then we're going to call get_joke. Okay, so we want to create a function called getJoke. And then what we can do here is create a variable called request, and we want to set that to Ajax, and then there's a method called Ajax. And that's going to give us a bunch of methods on this request object, such as open. So to make the actual call, we're going to say open. We're going to make a get request to that URL. We're going to set this parameter to true, which is, I believe, synchronous. I forget exactly what this parameter is, but this will make a get request. Now, in order for this to work, we have to call two more methods, which are bind and send. So the bind, we're going to say on complete. So when the request is complete or the response is complete, we want to call a function called on complete. Okay, and then we need to just call request.send. So it looks similar to an old school Ajax call before the fetch API. Now I'm going to just set the right here. I'm going to set the joke, which is the text, this right here. So I'm going to set that with .text to loading. So basically it's going to, when we run the event, it's going to say loading until the request completes. Now when it completes, we're going to call on complete, and that takes in request. Okay, and then here we can go ahead and let's console log the request object and then the response text and see what that gives us. So if I go ahead and I click this, this is going to say loading. It's going to stay at loading because we haven't done anything else, but if we look at what it gives us, it gives us a JSON object with categories, which is just an empty array, created at, what we're interested in is value. So value is the actual joke, but you can get this other stuff as well. Now, we need to convert this from JSON into something that Python can read, so we can actually import the JSON package like this. And then what we'll do is set, let's set a variable called data equal to JSON, and then there's a loads method. So basically we're loading the JSON into that data. I don't know why I put a semicolon there. So now this data, if we console log, let's say data, we should be able to get value, which is the joke. So if I go ahead and click this now, down here you're going to see the joke, just the joke, because that's in the value property. So what we can do, I keep putting a semicolon, too much JavaScript. So let's set the document joke equal to data, equal to the joke, and that's going to happen when it completes, because we're in this on complete. All right. Yeah. I mean, we could put data value into a variable called joke, and we actually need to set the text. We can't just set it directly. So we'll set that to joke. Let's try that. So we click it, we get loading, and when it comes back, it gets put into that element. Okay, so it's as simple as that. And of course, you could use a different API, you can use some back end or whatever you'd like. And I'm just going to get rid of console because we're no longer using that. So the next thing we're going to do is take a file. We're going to be able to grab a file and display it in the DOM, in the browser. And you could do this with different types of files. We're just going to use a text file. So let's go under what we just did, the joke button, and let's create an input with a type of file. And we don't need a name. We do want an ID though. I'm going to call it file upload. And we'll put a line break, and then underneath that let's put a text area. So this is where I want the text to be displayed. So I'm going to give this an ID of file-text. We don't need a name. So file text, and let's do calls 60 rows 10. Okay, so we'll save that, and this gives us this. And this obviously, I mean, this isn't going to do anything now. We need to add our script down here. So I'm just going to grab that and change that to script 4, and let's just put a comment in here. We'll say load file data. Okay, and then in here we're going to first bring in, let's say, from browser. So we want to import document, but we want to also import window. And then we're going to create a function here called file_read. And then we want an event on that file input. So we're actually going to put this on the same level as file read because that's what we want to call. So let's say document, and we have an ID of file upload, and we want to bind. Let's use the input event. So when we try to load a file, and then it's going to call file read. Okay, now inside file read, I'm actually going to have another function called onload. And inside onload, all we're going to do really is put the text in from the result. So we're going to say document dot, not dot. So document, and then we want the file text, which is the text area, and we want to set that value to e.target.result. Now, it's not as easy as just calling this. We need to get this result within this event parameter. So in order to do that, we have to create a file reader. So we're going to go on the same level as onload within the file read function here. And first we need to get the selected file as a DOM file object. So we create a variable here, and let's set document, and let's get file-upload, and we want to get the file that's uploaded. So that's going to be in an array or a list called files, and it's going to be the first item, so the 0 index. Then we want to create what's called a file reader instance. So we'll create a variable called reader and set that to this is why we need window, because file reader is on that. So we want to say file reader dot new. Okay, so that's going to create a new file reader instance, and then we need to read the file content as text. So we can take our file reader instance and we can call a method called read as text and pass in the file. Okay, then we want to bind it to that onload. So we can say reader dot bind, and when it loads, we want to call onload, and then we should have access to this e.target.result, and we're going to set the text area to that result. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So let's go ahead and try it out. We'll go ahead and grab a text file, and there it goes. It gets loaded right in there. All right, and I mean, you could use that for a bunch of stuff to be able to load a text file like that. So the next thing we're going to do is I just want to show you how we can simply rotate an object, and the main purpose of this is to show you how we can manipulate the style, the CSS. In JavaScript we can do, you know, .style, .color. So we're going to use .style, .transform to rotate something. So up in the HTML, let's go right here. Let's create a class, or use the class of card, and then create a button. I'm going to give it an ID of rotate-btn, and let's just say rotate. And then we're going to have a div of the class of box, and also an ID. I'm going to give this an ID of rotate dash, what do I want to call this? Rotate box. Okay, so if we save this, we should just see a button and then this blue box. So we're going to go down here, create a new script. Go ahead and grab this. Let's make sure we change that to 5. And let's add a comment here. We'll say rotate. We'll say manipulate style. Okay, so for this, let's first create our event. So we want to say document, and we have that rotate button. And we want to add a click event, so we want to bind click. And when we click, we're going to call a function called change. Now up here, I'm going to bring in from browser, document, and HTML. And I'm going to create a variable here called box and set that to our document rotate box, and set an angle variable of 10. So basically how much do I want to rotate it every time our function is called. And we're going to create our function called change, and we're going to make that angle variable global, so global angle. And then we can take that box and we can manipulate the style. Let's grab the transform. And we're actually going to use a Python f string here, which will allow us to it's basically a string, but allows us to use variables similar to a template string in JavaScript. So we're actually going to call rotate, which takes in, you know, something degrees, like 10 degrees, although this we want to be a variable, so we're going to put in our angle. Okay, and then once we do that, we want to increment angle, so we can say plus equals 10, and that should do it. So now every time I click this, excuse me, it's going to manipulate the style, the transform property, which is a CSS property, and it's going to set it to rotate, and then whatever that angle is, and that angle increments by 10 every time we click it. All right, and you can do some really cool animation stuff. You can even use Canvas, and again, that's all in the documentation. So the last thing I want to show you is how to use local storage. So back up to the HTML, let's go under the card here. We're going to have an H2 and say saved item, and then just a span, and we'll give this an ID of item, because whatever's in local storage I want to show there. And you can put anything you want in local storage with a key. We're just going to have one item, and the key is actually going to be item. So let's have an input. We'll give this an ID of item dash input, type text, and add a placeholder. We'll say add to local storage. And then I want 2 buttons underneath. So let's say button, give it an ID of add btn, say add item, or just add. And then I'm just going to add some inline style so that it's inline. I want to display inline. And then we'll copy this down and we'll have remove. And this is going to call or have an ID of remove button. Okay, so now if we take a look, we have an input with an add and remove. So now let's go back down here and let's create our last script. Grab that. And there's also session storage as well. So if you want it to be gone when the browser closes, you can use session storage. So let's say script 6, and let's say from browser we want to import documents. We also want HTML, window, and console. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do here is initialize a variable called storage and set it to window.local storage. And if you've used local storage with JavaScript, then this is going to look very familiar. So I want to first check. I'm going to do an if statement here. I'm going to check to see if storage.getItem, okay, just like with JavaScript, we want getItem and then the key, which I'm just going to call item. So if there's something there, then let's set document item, which is the span right here, whatever is here. We'll set that equal. We actually have to do this syntax here if we're going to insert it, and then we're going to set that to storage.getItem. Okay, so if it's there, then put it there. I'm going to save, and nothing is there because nothing is in that particular key in local storage. Now let's create our events. So we have an add button, and we want to bind. We want to bind a click to, let's say, add item. Okay, and then we'll create add item. And in add item, I'm going to set a variable called item to document, and then the item dash input, which is the text area, and I want the value of that. And we can do a console log here just to check it out. If I type something in here, it logs down here. So that's how you can get form inputs as well. Now we want to set this to local storage, so let's go ahead and take our storage object and let's call set item. And we're going to set it as the key is going to be item, so wrap that in quotes, and the value is going to be the variable of item. So we'll set that, and then as far as the content of the span, we'll set, I keep putting dot. It just comes natural to put dot after document. So here we'll say item, and we want to set the text content equal to item. So now if I put something in here like hello and add, it's going to get put here. And if I reload, it stays there because it's in local storage. If we go to application and we look at local storage and we look at our local host, you can see key item value hello. And if I put like by, it'll replace it. Okay. Now to remove, it's pretty simple. Let's just create another event for the remove button. And again, even if you're not familiar with Python, I mean, this is pretty easy. So let's say remove item, and by the way, I have a Python crash course. If I probably should have mentioned that in the beginning, but if you're interested. So for remove, let's just go ahead and take storage and call remove item, and we want to put the key, which is item, and then update the DOM. So document item, and I'm just going to set that to nothing because it's cleared. So we still have by in there, although if I remove it, I just set equals. I keep doing that. We want to say text content. There we go. Alright, so we'll add something, gets added, you can see it down here. If I reload, it still stays here, and then if I click remove, it goes away in local storage, and then the text content of item just gets set to nothing. If I reload, it's still gone, it's still gone from local storage. Okay, so that's it. I mean, this stuff it's pretty simple. And a lot of this is even easier to do with Brython than it is with vanilla JavaScript, in my opinion. And I'm not saying use it as a replacement or anything, but I mean, if you're more comfortable with Python and you're into web development, this might be an alternative for you as far as using, front-end DOM manipulation and stuff like that, making Ajax calls to your back end. Maybe you have a Flask back end or something. I don't know. I just figured it'd be interesting. I like it. I think it's cool. So that's it. I will see you in the next video.